Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by, and boy am I getting in a muddle. I have filmed so many clips, trying to sort them out into individual videos that have got an appropriate start and ending is proving a little difficult. Probably due to the second glass of wine in the middle of the afternoon, but so much for the weather forecast. It was supposed to cloud over with possibilities of rain this afternoon, and instead of that, the skies have cleared and it's got hot in here again. Nonetheless, this is part two, looking at the mounted orchids as I was watering earlier today. So here we go. Now, these three Cattleya type hybrids mounted. Some of these are actually miniatures, so may not grow that large. This one's Cattleya Marichen. Can't read my own writing. Marie Chen, crossed with Cattleya duvenii. This one's pushed out the new growth with 2 leaves. It is by nature a bifoliate, and it's got another new growth coming at the top, and it's grown quite a few roots. So I mean, it's attached nicely, and it's growing. So not sure how big it needs to get before we might think about seeing some blooms, but it's growing on, pushing up new growths and roots, so coming on nicely, that one. This one is in fact 2 pieces. The main piece is most of the plant. There's an odd piece to the left with 2 leaves and 1 pseudobulb that is just starting to push up a new growth at the very base of that pseudobulb. So I didn't think that piece was going to make it. The rest of the plant's okay. It's pushed out some nice roots, and its latest growth is quite nice. So yeah, it's coming on, and that one is oh god, this has got a lot of name. It's Pintarda, whatever that says, Rosarda crossed with you read it. I'm not in the mood. And this one's coming on nicely. This one's grown well. It's pushed up a nice new growth out there with 2 leaves, and it's got another one coming. Again, it's a bifoliate by nature, although the odd pseudobulb's got a single leaf, but a good root system, going away nicely now. And this is it's actually a Cattleya cross with an Encyclia. It's Cattleya Little Lemon Drops, which I know, and Encyclia spelt wrong. Vetulina. Well, I'm not doing a new tag just to put a C in. I know what it means. So this one's coming on nicely. So that's all 3 of those were out of the box from Beatrix, and they've all pushed on quite well. I'm pleased with them. Well, this is Dendrobium jenkinsii. Had its first mass blooming beginning of this year, and since then it's probably grown at least a dozen new growths, and it's still starting new growth, so it's still pushing them out. It's extending now across the bottom of the mount, so I think it's going to go up the back of the mount eventually, and out to the side and up over the top. It's coming out in all directions, so it's growing well, pushing out multiple new growths, and buried down in there are a lot of new roots as well. The root system I was getting a bit worried about, but it's now extending its root system out of the moss onto the bark, which is good, because the central portion of moss under the oldest part of the plant is probably long since gone and could do with coming off. But as long as it pushes out many new roots to go with the plant extensions that are on the bare bark, then I don't need to worry about that old bit of moss in the middle where the older part of the plant is, because the older part of the plant's not growing. So it doesn't matter that much if those roots die off. And all the new roots are under the new parts of the plant. So coming on well, that one. That's always grown well for me, but this is the first year it's had a decent blooming, and it was good. Getting on to some of the bigger stuff now that's almost impossible to film the whole plant. This is the Dendrobium friedrichianum that's just finished blooming now. Been in bloom for ages, but from now on my attention is turned to all of these nice new canes up the top that are pushing on at a rate of knots. Tend to forget to look at the growth aspect of a plant while it's in bloom, because you're busy enjoying the blooms. But while those blooms have been there, it's been getting these new canes off the ground, and they're pushing on great. And in addition to that, it's getting a new root system going, and it's quite an extensive root system, right up through the moss to the top of the mount, out the sides, and much activity going on in there. So this one's growing well, looking good. As I say, it's very easy to have your attention drawn away when something's in bloom, but in the meantime it's been going great guns. Well, Dendrobium hercoglossum's just been filmed out in the kitchen being effectively unmounted and remounted, which may sound odd, but it had some really old broken down moss underneath it, and it was also on a bad piece of cork bark that was deteriorating. So it's been put on effectively what to the plant is a new piece of bark, which in fact is the back of the old mount, and it's just a matter of pushing on these new growths now and hoping that the root system will get going. This has been in bloom a very long time, and even though it's not in season at the moment, it's about to do it again. It's got a couple of little clusters of out of season buds coming on. Plus it looks like it's going to do a couple of kikis as well, so that'll be good because new plants for other people. And there's some more buds over here as well, so it's going to have a little flurry. As I say, it's well out of season, but we'll take them if they're coming. Here's an example of catch-22 plus ant, minus ant. Plus one, minus one. Dendrobium findleyanum had a good blooming this year, well pleased with it. Lovely unusual shaped canes. These are the older canes now, but this particular older cane, singular, has two massive kikis on it. Now these are getting beyond kiki stage now. Where the canes hang down and the kiki's growing up, they're getting a distinct curve on them where they're turning up towards the light. That's going to make them difficult to plant and grow on unless they're mounted. They haven't really got that good a root system yet, but nonetheless they have roots, and I don't want to leave them on the cane much longer because they're growing too big as kikis go. If they get too big, at the moment they're taking energy from the main plant, so they're getting like a top up. But if they're detached, they lose that, and they've got to support themselves. And the bigger they get with this amount of roots, the more difficult that's going to be. So I think those are going to have to come off. As far as the plant's going, it's growing well. It's got some good new growths coming out of the top, and it's now got an extensive new root system. It does this every year. Actually, one of those new growths is a kiki up the top too. So that would be, actually two of them are. So there's not so many coming up from the base this year. But those two kikis near the top are so close to the mount that they can stay there and become part of the main plant, because their roots are close enough, and one of them's even attached already. So I'll just leave those kikis on, and they can just extend the size of the plant. But the other two are going to have to come off. But growing on, coming on nicely. And what I'm really pleased about is that root system. I think that's the best root system it's ever produced. So, good one. Now, this one's Dendrobium aphyllum. This is its new cane, pushing on. Obviously still growing, no terminal cane. We had this one in the kitchen not long ago because on the end of the old cane was a kiki. We took the kiki off and effectively mounted it near the base of the plant. So, you know, that should give it another cane. This one should bloom, no reason why not. Whether that will grow big enough to bloom, I don't know. Bearing in mind this cane was a kiki and it did bloom, so we'll have to wait and see. But it's got a good root system, it's got a nice new cane, and now it's got a little kiki growing from the base too, so we'll see how that progresses. But it's a lovely new cane, lovely healthy leaves. You have to excuse all the plants waggling around, but to get this plant in shot, I'm about 4 feet inside the lounge. It just has incredibly long canes, and they're not all pointing downwards at the moment. So this cane grew on through the winter. This will be where the next set of blooms come from, I would say, and possibly off of some of the, I doubt if these will bloom, but this one could do. It depends. And this is its latest cane up here, which is well growing. And what I'm pleased with this one again is that it's done a really good root system. Nice extensive root system pushed out by this new cane. Right up through the mount, right round the back, yeah, all down here, right round the sides. It's a lovely root system now to support this cane. And what I'm desperately trying to do with this, when I hang this one up, I'm hanging it like that. The idea being that the weight of that cane will eventually pull it downwards, and the sheer weight of it will bend it over, and then it can be pendulous like the rest of the plant. Because at the moment it's a flipping nuisance. We're about horizontal at the moment, so we've gone from upright over to there so far, and now we need to gradually push down to here and get down with the rest. It will happen, they all do it eventually. If it's a pendulous plant, it will end up down there, but this one's putting up a lot of resistance at the base. It just will not keel over. Come on. It's just difficult to accommodate it. If all the canes were hanging down, it would be easy, but with one sticking out like that, it's sort of wherever I put it is in the way, and just trying to get it down off the hook. I've got to be so careful where that goes and where this is pointing at the same time, or I knock plants over. It takes up a lot of space, and once it becomes vertical space, it'll be fine. But good root system and lovely strong cane coming on. I messed this one up in the winter because I thought it was a resting type, and it's not. And this cane carried on growing through the winter. I mean, it's got its terminal leaf now, it won't grow anymore. And this young growth grew through the winter. Well, that should have been a clue, really, shouldn't it? Anyway, I dried it off quite persistently and only gave it small amounts of water, so I'm surprised this cane's done that well. But it's growing on nicely now, and obviously getting watered and fed well. And come the winter time, yes, it will get less water and feed depending on what that cane's doing, but it won't get a true winter rest because this type doesn't have it. Dendrobium glomeratum, and if it ever blooms again, they are gorgeous. It's about the only other dendrobium I've got that's along the lines of that colour. So one day. This one I believe is Dendrobium linguella. It's the only one that fits the description that came out of the Beatrix box, and this came out in a bit of a state, I will say. All of the leaves that it had, which is these, looked severely cold damaged. Well, they haven't got any worse, so it's debatable whether it was cold damage. Yeah? I'd have thought they'd have yellowed and dropped off by now. But anyway, halfway up the cane it's producing 2 kikis that have now got some reasonable roots. They will come off soon and go up here to where the actual mount is, which is a long way from where the leaves are and the kikis are. But the good thing about this one, because this one was mounted thinking it was dead. Well, it's not dead, and it is producing a new growth from the base of the plant. And along with that, a few, not many, but a few new roots. So it's made it. It probably will grow slowly for a while. So it's had a hell of a setback. But by getting those 2 kikis off and bringing them up and mounting them here with the main plant, plus the new growth, it won't look so bad. So coming on, bearing in mind I mounted this thinking that plant's dead. I can't see any life on it at all. I'll just put it up there just in case. And as I said, since then, 2 nice kikis and a new growth and some new roots. So not dead at all. Now, this dendrobium I'm well pleased with this year. This is the first year it's actually done anything any sense. I've been struggling with this one. And again, I tried resting it when it wasn't strong enough and nearly killed it. This is Dendrobium primulinum. And it's got 3 nice new canes this year. Okay, one of them's only half the size of the other two, but that started to grow a little bit later than the other two. They're all growing on, none of them have got their terminal leaf yet, and in addition to that, it's also grown a reasonable root system. So once these canes develop up to their full size, this is then a strong plant again, and then we can see what we can do with it. Dendrobium primulinum. I believe this one did put out some blooms earlier in the year, but obviously the next blooms will come on these 3 new canes late winter, early spring. So they're next year's blooms. Growing on, and the bigger these canes get, the more chance there are of buds, because there's more leaf nodes. You know, the buds come out from along the length of the cane. The longer the canes, the more chances of blooms, or the more blooms you can get. So yes, it's developing into a nice strong plant now. Well pleased with that this year, at long last. Now this tangle of old shriveled canes, which are coming off soon, is my Dendrobium anosmum. I have a horrible feeling this might have been a collected plant out in its country of origin, looking at the way it arrived. But when it arrived, it had a couple of reasonable canes and quite a lot of older shriveled canes, all in a nice neat line. And basically I managed to grow 1 new cane last year, which bloomed very well. Well pleased with that. And this year it's also only grown 1 cane. Now I was expecting more of it this year, so I'm a little disappointed to only get 1 new cane. It's unlikely to bloom anywhere else on the plant apart from this new cane, but the good thing is it's done a massive root system, which it didn't have. It virtually had no roots, so it's made up for that. That will help give it strength for next time round. I doubt if it's going to produce any more new growths this year, so I'm stuck with this one. It's another ant. So I'm finding the ants today in some very unusual places, and none of the usual places. So perhaps they've twigged that if they sit in the usual place, they die. But only a few. I'm down to just a few now. But this is growing on nicely. This is nowhere near finished growing, and there's still a good bit of growing season left. Whether it can achieve this length, which is where the last year's got to, I don't know. But if it gets somewhere near it, I'll be pleased. There's no reason why it shouldn't grow on strong with a root system like that backing it up. So I'm pleased in some senses, but in others I really think this ought to have pushed out more than 1 growth this year. Some of these older canes need to come off. They have long since ceased to be. You can see there's still some solidness in the cane down to there, but then it's gone. You know, this is nothing. This is just a stick. So these canes would be better off. The plant will look better for it, yeah? And it may even be that the plant's actually pushing some energy down into these sticks, thinking that they're part of the plant. So if they weren't there, it couldn't do it, could it? And then all the energy can go into the good parts of the plant. But anyway, 1 good cane and 1 good root system, and hopefully blooms in the spring again. It's another one of the long cane dendrobiums. This is Dendrobium nesta. It's had gorgeous blooming this year, but it's strange the way this one's developed. It was in bloom when I got it, and the following year I managed to grow 1 giant cane, and it's the biggest cane it's ever had, but just the 1. And then last year I got 3 canes, but they were much shorter. They all bloomed, but now this year I've gone back to 2 canes. But looking at the strength of them and the position we are in the growing season now, I think these are going to be longer than last year's, even though there's only 2. But they're good, big, strong, fat canes with lovely leaves on. I don't remember the leaves on the previous canes ever being this big. And it's grown quite a lot of new roots up in there as well. So yeah, I'm pushing on 2 growths this year instead of 3, but hopefully they'll be bigger, which means they'll have a longer length and more blooms, obviously. Excuse the helicopter. That's a big one. You know, when all the panes of glass start rattling and your cups bounce along your shelf and fall off the end, you know it's a big helicopter. Not a Chinook though, not as bad as those things. Anyway, coming on nicely, Dendrobium nesta. Right, now we're going from the quite big to the silly big. This is a monster. You've heard me quite a bit talking about the big box orchids. This plant is the reason the box was big. It was to get this one in, and then all the others just tucked in around it. But this is a very large dendrobium, and this one has spider mite damage on it. It had it when I got it. It was double checked and there were none alive on it, and I still believe there are none alive on it. But up the top here, effectively there's two plants there because it fell in two, sort of. It might have had a bit of help, I can't remember, but it's in two pieces. But they're both mounted together at the same level and wired on because it's a heavy plant, and it's difficult to even possibly count how many new growths there are on there. We'll just say many, that's the easiest way, but they're pushing on very strong. They started off quite slow and they started to push on and they seemed to sort of almost stop, and I thought, oh hell, are they all going to abort? But then they just took off and they're growing at a rate of knots now, and in amongst there are some new roots coming. The roots are slow to follow on, but with this number of canes and this number of existing leaves, there's more than enough strength in there to grow those without roots. But nonetheless, the roots are coming on behind. This has also got a lot of kikis lurking. Yeah, some of which are growing on now and starting to form roots. I mean, this particular cane has got one nice one there. This one's got 4 on it, all starting to produce roots. There's a couple here, a couple of nice looking little root systems there with kikis attached. So at the end of the day, there's either a new pot full or a new mount full any minute now, because those kikis can come off. I'll wait till they all get to a similar size and then they can all get the same treatment. But yeah, there are quite a few of those. And in theory, there is no reason whatsoever why this plant should not bloom on at least some of these older canes. It will eventually be deciduous on the canes. Some of the canes they're already leafless. Well, it's got 2 leaves and 4 kikis, so not quite leafless, but it is a deciduous type. But at some point down the line, this is going to bloom. When, I don't know, and from where, I don't know, because it's a new plant. But that is by far my biggest plant, and I've never had a plant with that many new growths on it. Never. It's absolutely massive. And I'm just hoping, I think we're going to get there, that these are going to push on outwards. I've got them facing the light, or the strongest light, so that they grow towards it, and then as they gain their weight, hopefully they will come down and join this lot. Because if it grows upwards to that extent, I won't be able to accommodate it. But it's growing incredibly well. Very pleased. That's Dendrobium chryseum, and yeah, growing well. So that's the end of the mounts. I'll look round the mounts, and as I say, they're all in, they're virtually all in growth mode. It's that time of year. The next main update is not now going to be until we get to the end of the growing season, because it's just more growth. It's highly unlikely anything's going to bloom. But when we get to the end of the growing season, we'll have a look over the mounts and see how they've done, how much the canes have extended and all that sort of thing. And then those that are heading in towards their winter rest, obviously they'll get separated out into their own set, and then we can talk about getting them into their winter rest slowly but surely, and what the winter rest will actually consist of. I have no plans to change it this year. The results of last year's winter rest were pretty spectacular this late winter, early spring. Mass bloomings on some plants that either hadn't bloomed before or had only, partially bloomed. So I see no reason to drop the temperature anymore, no reason to change the frequency of watering. There's no good talking about the feed because there won't be any. But later in the year we'll get into that, and obviously not all the dendrobiums rest, so they get separated out, put in a place, and dealt with through the winter. But that's to come later. See you next time. Okay, that was a look at the mounted orchids. They are predominantly dendrobiums, but as you saw, there were a few oddities mixed in with them. I don't only mount dendrobiums, I do mount other things as well. And we go from the giant, almost ridiculous, down to the miniatures, and most of which are not in bloom at the moment. There are very few mounted orchids out. That just happens to be the way it is. With the predominance of dendrobiums in amongst the mounted ones, also in amongst those dendrobiums that are mounted are many of the resting types. So these are late winter, early spring bloomers and have an annual growth pattern. So they don't tend to bloom at any other time. And once they're done, they're done. And then we grow on all these lovely new growths, ready for next year. So thanks for dropping by, and see you next time.